stepping up his war with the FBI, saying the agency's focus on Russia collusion led investigators to miss signs that could have prevented the Florida school shooting. We'll discuss what must be done about the corrupt leadership at the highest levels of the FBI and Justice Department with Fox News legal analyst Greg Jarrett and Chris Farrell of Judicial Watch. Also tonight, the president expressing support for changes to the gun background check system. According to the White House, the president is open to a bipartisan bill that would improve how state and local agencies share mental health and criminal record information with the federal government. We take it up with political analyst Ed Rollins and conservative commentator Michelle Malkin. Our top story tonight, mounting pressure on the FBI after the agency admitted it failed to pursue a tip on the Florida school shooter. President Trump over the weekend urging the agency to, quote, get back to basics, suggesting the agency missed the warning signs in Florida because it was distracted by the Russia probe. Fox News White House correspondent Kevin Corke has our report.
It was a digital deluge. A defiant President Trump's weekend tweet storm ran the gamut of topics, but the Russia investigation clearly was front and center. If it was the goal of Russia to create discord, disruption, and chaos within the U.S., they have succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. They're laughing their asses off in Moscow. The president's foray into the Twitterverse was just his latest attempt to draw a contrast between his constant refrain of no Russia collusion with the ongoing Russia probe, which, despite the recent indictments of more than a dozen Russian nationals, is ongoing. Predictably, today the Kremlin rejected the notion that they were interfering with America's elections.
It looks like accusations have been made, but no evidence was presented. So when Americans say that Russia does not acknowledge obvious facts, for us, these aren't obvious and aren't facts yet.
Even a member of the president's own cabinet wasn't spared from the wave of Russia-related criticism. Case in point, this comment from its national security advisor at a security summit in Germany.
And as you can see with the FBI indictment, the evidence is now really incontrovertible and available in the public domain.
The president chided McMaster, writing, forgot to say the results of the 2016 election were not impacted or changed by the Russians. Whether or not votes were changed or the election impacted by Russian interference is still anyone's guess. However, the fact that the indictments allege the Russians have been targeting the U.S. since 2014 drew this question from the president today. Obama was president up to and beyond the 2016 election. So why didn't he do something about Russian meddling? Exactly what the former president and his senior intelligence cadre knew about Russian meddling long before the 2016 election calls into question who could have or should have done something to stop it.
Obama was in a very difficult position. He did not want to make it appear that he was favoring Hillary Clinton. Maybe he should have done more.
But while Mr. Trump asserts the new indictments mean he's in the clear, some warn that may not be the case.
Congressman, you've seen the intelligence. Do you think that this indictment suggests that it's a case closed, no collusion?
No, of course not. But this is a president who claims vindication anytime someone sneezes.
Getting back, David, to what the Obama administration knew or didn't know about Russian meddling back in 2016, former Vice President Joe Biden has said that they were walking a constant tightrope over how much or how little to say about what they knew with regard to Russian meddling. Critics have certainly argued that since then they have said decidedly too little, far too late. David?
Kevin Corke, thank you very much. Well, President Trump is backing an effort to improve background checks for guns following the Florida shooting. A bipartisan bill by Senators John Cornyn and Chris Murphy would provide incentives for states to upload conviction records into the federal background check system. The president's support comes amid new reports that Florida's social services also missed several chances to recognize shooter Nicholas Cruz as a danger. Fox News correspondent Steve Harrigan is in Parkland, Florida, with our report.
Appearing in court today for another motions hearing, 19-year-old suspect Nicholas Cruz kept his head down and said nothing. His public defender says Cruz will plead guilty to 17 counts of first-degree murder in an effort to avoid the death penalty.
Shame on you!
More anti-gun rallies were held at major cities across the country. Young people in Washington laid in front of the White House, demanding lawmakers intervene to stop gun violence. And students from Stoneman Douglas High School, where their fellow classmates lost their lives, have announced plans for a national gun control march in Washington set for March 24th.
Our elected officials need to get together, overcome their political differences, and get some things done because they need to save the future of our country.
President Trump has scheduled a listening session to meet with students on Wednesday. Some survivors of the shooting criticized Trump's weekend Twitter attack on the FBI. Very sad that the FBI missed all of the many signals sent out by the Florida school shooter. This is not acceptable. They are spending too much time trying to prove Russian collusion with the Trump campaign. This, as the White House signals Trump would back congressional efforts to strengthen federal background checks for gun purchases. And Florida Senator Marco Rubio urged state legislators to consider so-called red flag laws that enable family members or law enforcement to have guns taken away from someone deemed to be a threat. But the family Nicholas Cruz lived with after the death of his mother last year told ABC's Good Morning America they saw no warning signs from Cruz.
Everything everybody seems to know, we didn't know. We had rules, and he followed every rule to the T.
Meantime, the number of warnings about Cruz that were missed continues to grow. Information that a social worker visited Cruz at home after he posted pictures of himself on social media cutting his arms and saying he wanted a gun. The social worker concluded Cruz was a, quote, low risk to harm himself or others. Some students here are still struggling to understand what happened.
I was with Meadow, talking to Meadow right before, the gunman started shooting. And it's, it is very sad, but at the same time, I know that she's in a safer place now, and the angels will be with her.
The road to the school is open now. The school itself is expected to be open for teachers by the end of the week. It's still not clear when the students will return. David, back to you.
Steve Harrigan, thank you very much. Joining me now is Fox News legal analyst Greg Jarrett. Greg, it's clear the FBI admits that they dropped the ball on this. The Miami office was not notified about this creep, but what could the FBI, if the Miami office had been notified, what could they have done to keep an eye on this guy? They couldn't have taken away his guns, right? He got them legally.
Yeah, but you said it. They could keep a close eye on him. They could go knocking on the door, talk to the people who live there, talk to him if he's willing to talk. He's an adult. He can refuse to talk to them. But they might have been able to essentially scare him off and convince the family, take away that AR-15 that was stored in a locked cabinet. So there are some things that they could have done, but I must say any of the measures on the table right now to tighten background checks and so forth, good idea, but they wouldn't have stopped this.
Let's switch to the Mueller indictment. Rush Limbaugh yesterday was on Fox News Sunday, and he spoke to the idea of how the president should deal with the news of the Russian indictments that we heard about on Friday. Let's play the tape.
The worst thing he could do in his world is to validate this whole investigation by claiming victory here, because what if down the road there is another indictment or a series of indictments that do name Trump or do name the Russians and Trump campaign colluding? Because that's what this is about. This is about getting Trump, Chris. This whole thing is about setting Trump up for impeachment if the Democrats win in 2018. Donald Trump remains in the crosshairs. He is the target, and there is no let-up in that.
Has Rush got it right?
He absolutely has it right, as he often does. This was a sideshow, the indictment of the Russians, because Mueller knows he'll never have to prosecute the case. They're not in the country. He's not going to get them here. The second of all, it gave him the opportunity to say, see, everybody, my investigation is indeed legitimate. But look closely at all of the dozens of people that he has interviewed. He has asked them, all of them, about Trump. He's negotiating to talk to Trump. His sights are squarely on Donald Trump. I don't think he's going to find any evidence of collusion, and there never was any, but he may be turning to obstruction of justice, which, in my legal opinion, doesn't even come close to applying to what the president did in firing Comey.
Well, if he is now focusing on what Russia did, and forgive me for my naivete, but shouldn't he see what impact the Russians had, if any, on something, like the Trump dossier, for example?
Oh, absolutely. Listen, the people who were putting together that dossier are in legal jeopardy. That means Glenn Simpson, Fusion GPS, could even mean the Hillary Clinton campaign and the DNC, if they knew that they were paying a Russian national. That's against the law. It's against the Campaign Election Reform Act. And it's also against the Foreign Registration Act. So it depends on who knew what. But the people who then used the dossier to obtain a warrant, I've got a list of 6 different crimes, all of them felonies, from obstruction of justice to fraud to conspiracy to commit fraud to abuse of power to making a false statement to perjury. Those are all crimes that were committed by the people who signed false documents and presented it to the FISA judge.
And we should remember, before the Hillary campaign began to pay Fusion GPS for the Trump dossier, Fusion GPS was working with Russian interests who wanted to get rid of the sanctions, which is known as the Magnitsky Act.
Right.
They were actually trashing the Magnitsky family. Magnitsky was a guy who was essentially killed by Putin in a Russian jail. Glenn Simpson and Fusion GPS were smearing the family in order to get rid of the Sanctions Act. It's ironic that now Adam Schiff and other Democrats are suggesting that Trump's the one who doesn't want to get rid of the sanctions, when in fact it was the DNC's outfit, Fusion GPS, that was in that role.
It surely was. And, you know, look, I just finished again. It's agonizing to read Glenn Simpson's testimony because he's so profoundly inarticulate. 311 pages of the Senate testimony. He's all over the place. He's sort of this Walter Mitty character. But I see him as really being one of the villains in all of this because he had to have known that what Christopher Steele was providing him was on its face utterly absurd, and yet he talked to reporters about it. He encouraged Christopher Steele to talk to the FBI about it, and all of this unfolded.
Greg, good to see you. Thank you very much. Greg Jarrett. We are coming right back with a lot more. Please stay with us. President Trump claiming vindication after the indictment of Russian nationals in the Mueller probe.
Both the indictment and Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein said that there was no evidence of knowing interaction between Trump officials and this rather large campaign operation or election operation by the Russians.
We take up the fallout with Ed Rollins next. And the White House announcing support for efforts to strengthen background checks on gun purchases. We'll have much more on the president's effort to keep our schools safe when we return. New reports that Chief of Staff John Kelly is facing an uncertain future in the Trump White House. Axios reporting that Kelly has lost the support of some of his subordinates, and several senior staff have privately questioned his honesty following the Rob Porter scandal. President Trump has also reportedly been asking for people's opinions on the 3 top contenders to replace Kelly: Kevin McCarthy, Gary Cohn, and Mick Mulvaney. Joining me now is Ed Rollins, Great America PAC chairman, former Reagan political director, and Fox business contributor. Ed, what is your guess on General Kelly and his future?
My guess is General Kelly will stay there for a period of time. Certainly isn't going to stay through the administration. I hope that, as I said the other night, I hope he stays through the election. I think there's enough chaos in this White House that you don't need to bring a new chief of staff in at this point in time. And I can just tell you, if you're the chief of staff, you've been a 4-star general in the Marine Corps, you don't have to take any crap from subordinates who work for you.
That's right. Or, by the way, from Chinese guards that are trying to take away the nuclear football. For those who don't know, there's a story that when the president was in China back in November, a Chinese guard tried to disarm, literally, the aide who had the nuclear football, which is the colloquial name for the nuclear codes.
Nuclear codes.
And he failed, and General Kelly came in and pushed the guy away. I kind of like that.
I like that, too. And I think, again, I don't think Kelly's as politically astute as he should be in the job he's in, but I think he's straightened the place out. And I think, but it's hard when the president's interviewing other people and talking about who's a replacement or what have you. And I could pick everybody on the list apart that he has up there, but I think at this point in time, just the idea of another shakeup in this White House would not be a good.
Well, there's another person. Some people are focusing on another general, McMaster, who is the National Security Advisor. Some people suggest that what he has been saying, in particular, he said something over the weekend about the Mueller indictments on Friday being incontrovertible evidence that there was Russian involvement. The president tweeted out as a result of that, maybe we could put it up on the screen, General McMaster forgot to say that the results of the 2016 election were not impacted or changed by the Russians, and that the only collusion was between Russia and crooked Hillary and the DNC and the Dems. Remember the dirty dossier, uranium speeches, emails, and the Podesta company kind of puts the focus back where the media doesn't want to go.
Well, my only counsel to General McCaster is the National Security Advisor doesn't have to comment on everything. And obviously, he's a very able person, and he's had his problems with President Trump, too. And what I hear is that he's a very extraordinary briefer, but it's a lot of detail, and the president obviously isn't into a lot of detail. So my sense today is the president ought to just say, all right, these are the ones I want, these are the ones I don't want. If you're going to shake it up quick, and you got a very long year ahead of you with a big election, and a lot of things are going to happen. So I think the more of these stories that are out there, the more damaging it is to the president of the White House.
A final quick question about gun control and the Florida shooting. There is this extraordinary hypocrisy on the part of Democrats about gun control. Under President Obama, there were 24 mass shootings. Absolutely. And no real significant increase in gun control measures in terms of legislation. Now it appears that Donald Trump is going to be working with some Democrats on trying to strengthen those background checks. I don't suppose he'll get any credit for it, because he never does.
And obviously, the tragedy is to those families and to the country. He's being blamed for it, and he doesn't have anything to do with it. I mean, it's not his fault that the gun laws were such that you could get away with whatever. I promise you, I've been around the game a long time. Moving any legislation on guns is very, very difficult. And I think unless you can do it bipartisan, unless you can do it off the radar, and you sort of come with 218 votes in the House combined and 60 in the Senate, you're just not going to get there. If you want to debate it, the NRA will get its troops up, and the troops are not just the NRA.
But even when the NRA is in favor of some things, like with the bump stocks,
absolutely,
it still didn't move in Congress.
There's still 300 million guns in this country, and probably 200 million who own them, and they feel very passionately about these things. And you can't blame the NRA for the tragedy that took place in Florida, and too many people are, and you shouldn't blame the president for it either.
Ed Rollins, good to see you. Thank you very much. Be sure to vote in tonight's poll. Do you believe it's time for the FBI to clean up its corrupt leadership and focus on preventing crime rather than political witch hunts? Cast your vote on Twitter at Lou Dobbs. And follow Lou on Twitter at Lou Dobbs. Like him on Facebook. And follow him on Instagram at Lou Dobbs tonight. Coming up next, President Trump says the Russia indictments clear his campaign and prove no collusion. We'll take up the Russia witch hunt with Chris Farrell of Judicial Watch. The legal watchdog group Judicial Watch is suing for information on Obama administration efforts to unmask members of the Trump campaign. Judicial Watch is seeking documents related to UN Ambassador Samantha Power's highly unusual efforts to identify Americans referenced in surveillance of foreign nationals. Power unmasked more than 260 people during just the final year in office. Joining me now is Chris Farrell, Director of Investigations and Research for Judicial Watch. Chris, I got to tell you, when I first read that Inauguration Day email that Susan Rice sent to herself, she was National Security Director at the time, that she sent to herself talking about how they're going to do everything by the book in all of these investigations, I immediately thought of unmasking, of Samantha Power and her unmasking all those people. Am I way off on that?
No, I think you're right on the nose. I mean, look, Susan Rice is now a certified liar. She's the one on television and kept claiming that Benghazi was a spontaneous protest, that it wasn't a determined terrorist attack. We all know that it was. Yet she made the rounds saying, 180 degrees out from that, a series of lies. And so when you see her writing an email, this sort of panacea email to herself saying, right, oh, don't worry, everything's legit. The odds are 1,000,000 to 1 that that's exactly what the case is not.
Exactly. And if you're suspecting that the Obama administration was looking for an in inside the Trump campaign for whatever reason, whether illicit or illicit reason, the unmasking was the perfect way to get inside the Trump campaign, right?
Absolutely. I mean, this is penetrating behind the scenes of sources and methods to uncover some of the most sensitive signals intelligence information available and violating the rights of American citizens. you would think that all the civil libertarians out there would be hysterical over this sort of abuse of power.
Not if it's Trump. It depends on whose ox is being gored. If it's Trump's ox, they don't care. I'm just curious, though, even if you get any of these emails or whatever documents you're looking for of Samantha Powers in terms of unmasking, won't they be so heavily redacted that you can't make sense of them?
I don't believe so. I mean, these are all items or materials that at this point are historical, right? This is all after the fact. There will be redactions, of course, for classified information, mostly sources and methods. But the interesting thing, I think, will be the justifications, the requests themselves. What compelled them to do this? On what grounds? And certainly, while the intelligence take might be classified, their rationale or their explanation as to why certain communications have to be unmasked, that does not meet the same threshold.
Now, won't the names themselves be redacted? They'll be taken out, won't they?
They probably will, in order to respect the privacy of the persons involved.
Sure, sure. I got to switch quickly to the Russian investigation, if I can, because this indictment that we saw on Friday of the 13 Russians, of course, they'll never be brought to justice because they're never going to be extradited from Russia. But is it possible that if Mueller is serious about following that thread, that he could find out whether Russians were involved in the Trump dossier?
Yes. I mean, in the sense that the DNC and Hillary Clinton and Glenn Simpson and Fusion GPS were all busy shoveling money to Russian operatives who were involved in a really masterful active measures campaign involving information operations, propaganda. This is, Putin and the Russians are laughing.
Right.
They've taken the money of the DNC and Hillary Clinton, and they're laughing at how they've manipulated our system so horribly, all under the nose of President Obama, Jim Comey, and the other cast of characters who had foreknowledge of it and did nothing.
And it's clear that the Trump dossier fit right into the schedule of their hijinks, what they were trying to do to screw things up over here.
Well, they knew the audience, right? The Russians knew the appetite of persons within the Hillary Clinton campaign and the DNC, and they had just enough salacious, creative writing to whet their appetite and really, go whole hog on trying to get as much crazy information as they could, even though it was false, it was misleading, and there was no foundation for it. They were still happy to write checks to the Russians.
They knew just how to bait the hook. That's what
Correct.
was going on. Chris Farrell, good to see you. Let us know what happens with your search. We appreciate it.
Will do, David. Thank you very much.
We're coming right back with much more. Please stay with us. The Dems abandoning their DACA plans to score political points. Much more on the battle over the immigration bill when we come back. And you don't need skis or a snowboard to take on the slopes. We'll introduce you to a brand new winter sport you won't see at the Olympics. Stay with us. I'm David Asman in for Lou Dobbs. President Trump taking aim at Oprah over a 60 Minutes segment on his presidency. Listen to a part of Oprah's discussion with voters.
So polls are showing that respect for the United States is eroding around the world. Do you care what the world thinks of the United States?
Absolutely.
Yes. I work with global students that want to come to the United States. Well, ever since Trump got elected in 2016, the numbers of incoming global students have gone down. They do not feel safe.
Yes.
That's a shame.
And what are they afraid of?
Trump.
The president tweeting in response, quote, just watched a very insecure Oprah Winfrey, who at one point I knew very well, interview a panel of people on 60 Minutes. The questions were biased and slanted, the facts incorrect. Hope Oprah runs so she can be exposed and defeated, just like all of the others. And liberal director Michael Moore's not just a tool, he's a tool of Russian propaganda. It turns out Moore attended an anti-Trump protest that was organized by the Russian nationals who were just indicted for meddling in our election. According to the latest round of Mueller indictments, the Russians scheduled dueling demonstrations in New York City on November 12, 2016, the same day Moore tweeted out this picture. Joining me now is Michelle Malkin, nationally syndicated columnist, author, and host of Michelle Malkin Investigates on CRTV.com. So, Michelle, I imagine we're about to see all these articles about Russian collusion with anti-Trump leftists, right?
Yeah, right.
Don't hold your breath.
We'll be waiting a long time for that, David. I found it quite amusing for Michael Moore, who has been leading that resistance for these 18 months, to now be revealed as an unwitting tool and fool of the Russian-sponsored resistance. No, we're not going to get any of those articles, David.
What are your impressions of the indictment that we saw? It was about a 37-page indictment, had a lot of interesting charges. Of course, a lot of the information we already knew. The trolling organization that was set up in Moscow by Putin and his associates, we've known about that for months.
We have, and if you step back and have sort of a larger historical perspective on the meddling by any number of foreign governments in our elections, and, to be frank, vice versa, this is not anything that we should be shocked that is happening. That is not to belittle in any way the importance of our intelligence agencies combating any kind of information warfare, whether it be from Russian trolls or any other foreign government. But it certainly does not require the kind of hysteria and hyperbole that we're getting from the anti-Trump media, who are likening these 13 Russian trolls and their efforts, which really are a drop in the bucket if you look, again, perspective-wise, at all of the spending that was done in the last election cycle.
And we should also remind that the indictment is replete with examples of where they both supported anti-Trump rallies and pro-Trump rallies. So, I mean, they were on both sides of, they were just trying to create chaos. I mean, that's the bottom line.
That's right. Division and discord, as if we didn't already have enough of that domestic anyway. But the hyperbole that somehow this kind of meddling and interference was on the order of 9/11 or Pearl Harbor, as many of these shameless journalists have been saying, it really just shows you how much they've lost their minds, their souls, and their hearts.
Well, what about the FBI? Because you saw the Trump tweet that the FBI was so distracted by some of this Russia stuff that they may have lost clues that would have led them to the shooter in Florida.
Well, I certainly think that there is an element in truth of that. But I think more broadly, we've had a number of problems with the FBI. And I believe that this goes back to those deep state bureaucrats that date back to the Clinton era, who are more interested in researching their political opponents than they are in acting on tips, both of public safety matters, like the ones in Florida this past week, but also, I mean, if you think of many of the major jihad events over the last several years, and certainly under the Obama administration, where the FBI was asleep at the wheel.
Yeah. By the way, those who are skeptical of the deep state, I'm old enough to remember when the Reagan administration came into power, there was a deep state that existed from the Carter administration, from previous administrations, that the Reagan folks really had to work hard to fight against, and they didn't win all of those battles. And one battle they didn't win was in the State Department.